Hello, I'm Steve Oliver, the director of Johnny Warren's Football Mission. You're about to see some of the material we shot that didn't make it into the final cut. It was really hard to squeeze Johnny Warren's eventful life into 52 minutes. He had so many friends and they had so many stories that it was tough leaving out some really good material. The following extended interviews hopefully complement the documentary and give you a small insight into the film's production. As you'd expect, Les Murray was extremely supportive of the film, and I originally thought to interview him in an SBS studio because of its behind-the-scenes feel. But he preferred the comfort of his own apartment to reflect the personal side of his friendship with Johnny.
I didn't know Johnny Warren personally when he was a young player, even at Budapest and then St George. I was just a fan. My two brothers and I were just, and my parents too, we went to the games. We used to travel up from Wollongong where we lived, which was in those days a 3-hour journey, go to the games and watch our idols. And most often when we came up from Wollongong, we came up nice and early on a Sunday so we could go and have lunch before the game, before the 3 o'clock kickoff game. And we knew where the Budapest team was having its pre-match lunch. It was always at a Hungarian restaurant in Elizabeth Street called the Oasis. So we always went to the Oasis to have lunch. We had our goulash there and whatever, but we always tried to find a table that was close to the team, and so that we could go home and say, well, I was sitting 3 meters away from Johnny Warren. So we were stalking these guys. And Johnny in particular, he was a big hero in those days.
Johnny described Ray Bartz as the most skillful player ever to play for Australia. We interviewed him up at his own sports shop in Newcastle, and he got quite choked up at times and actually called me a few days later and said, "Oh, please don't make me look like a sook." But he was a great interviewee.
Johnny was a tremendous leader. You know, he on the park, he always led by example, you know, always 110% effort. You know, he wouldn't sort of do anything. He wouldn't ask you to do anything that he wouldn't do himself, for instance, you know. But not only being a tremendously competitive player, he was also a very gifted player. You know, he always would create, he'd score goals at the time when you wanted goal score. He was always the type of player that you would like in your team, and especially to be captain, it was just a nice bonus, you know, it was terrific. And off the park, Johnny was, at various functions, always a habit of saying the right thing at the right time, and, you know, always sort of, you know, as I said, set examples for all the other boys, you know.
We spent an entire day filming with Rally Rasic, as he's got a huge amount of 1974 World Cup memorabilia, and he's an enthusiastic talker. He had a hot and cold relationship with Johnny over the years, and here he tells a great story about one of their many run-ins during a match against Greece in 1970.
We were 2-0 up against Greece. Mackay was doing a marvellous job. Richards was marking his opponent perfectly, and Johnny was sitting in a corner and sort of like making body language, was a funny way with his hands. But Johnny said, nobody's marking. And I said, who is not marking? I said, Mackay or Richards or whatever. And I just pointed out at Johnny, I said, Johnny, we have a problem. It's your problem. Your player scored the goal. I'll give you 10 minutes to sort out problem between you and your opponent. So Johnny was absolutely fuming, and I was at the door and he was pushing the door, wanted to go out. But I tell you something, that the character of the man, his ability to be so vicious was unbelievable. He went and demolished the guy by the name of Eleftherakis, who was well-known Greek midfielder. But 3-1 victory in Athens, unheard of against Greece. So I go to Johnny after the match, put my hand on the top of his head, and I said, I should criticize you more often. And he said something that I opted not to hear, and wasn't bad, but, you know, wasn't what I would like to. And when we arrived to the hotel, I said to Johnny, I said, can I see you for a few minutes? He said, sure. He came over, I said, 2 options. One, pack up your bags, go to Sydney, or do what I tell you. He walked 5 meters and walked back. He said, I do what you tell me. And that for a man of his caliber to do it, I don't think so that many footballers of that caliber would do it, especially if you are captain of the team who had a big role to play in the past with a different environment, different coach.
When I first met Johnny's old school friend, John Economos, he was a bit nervous as he'd never really been interviewed formally before. But he assured me that there was enough material to make a 10-part series on Johnny Warren, and he was probably right. We filmed the interview in Cleveland Street High School, where they first met as kids.
I'm one of the few people still alive or can remember that John was so talented at soccer, which everyone knows today, but what they don't know is he was an extremely talented cricketer, which was his real passion. But in those days, he had work, he had university, he had soccer training, and he didn't know which way to go. And because he got in the first grade at high school, he pursued soccer. I have no doubt whatsoever that John Warren would have easily have graduated. Had he elected cricket, he would have played for Australia. He was an unyielding batsman, a right-hand batsman, very similar to Steve Waugh. Very similar, just defiant against all odds. In fact, I remember the last year of school, 1960, we were playing the New South Wales state champion, Sydney High, and John hadn't picked up a bat in the practice nets for a whole year, and the reason being he was out injured from soccer after having kicked Canterbury into the grand final in the semi-finals, and he suffered severe injuries to both of his legs, and that restricted him from practice. And when it came to play Sydney High, the sports master insisted that he plays, and we knew we were going to get thrashed. And as expected, Sydney High went straight through Cleveland Street and just wiped us all out for 92. However, Johnny Warren remained not out 63. He carried the bat right through, and it was just absolutely incredible, absolutely incredible. So much so that they had a sports assembly at school to announce it in front of all the kids, his Herculean achievement.
Neither Johnny's mother Marjorie or his brother Jeff found the interview process very easy. His mum was such a huge influence on him throughout his life that I felt it was really important to interview her, but I think it proved quite difficult for her. Why do you think he had so many friends?
Well, he was a friend as well. Not a matter of having a friend, he was a friend to everyone. Mm.
And everybody really liked John, didn't they? Mm. Why do you think he was so popular?
Because he went out to people. You know, he just didn't wait for people to come to him. He went out to people.
Jeff was really helpful throughout the production, giving me access to old photos, and he was just a wealth of knowledge. But he warned me that he was a nervous kind of person, and he found being in front of the camera, I think, a pretty emotional experience.
March 2002, John launched his book, Shirley's, Wogs and Poofters, and from that time on, John wasn't really happy in the way the book was being marketed, and John would travel around the different stores, bookstores, to see where his book was placed in the shops, and it wasn't up the front like many other books. It was always down the back, which John is one of the reasons John was fighting to get football recognised. But that, then in June the same year, the World Cup was on, and John was doing the commentary the commenting on the World Cup games. And after those games, instead of John coming home, John would go to at least one, possibly two functions, pushing his book, and plus doing radio interviews with 2UE, 6PR, 5DN. John was really pushing himself to the limit, and his immune system would have been would have been pushed to the limit.
Some of the most candid interviews we did were with Johnny's ex-partners. As the film focused on his football mission, many of these personal insights and anecdotes had to be left out. Here, his Uruguayan ex-wife Mariana talks of the huge influence of his mother on his life.
I think that we were all aware that Mrs. Warren wasn't going to give his baby away too easily. I believe, so he told me, and so I heard from many members of the family or relationships that nobody was good enough for Johnny or for her children. And many, many times he will say to me, don't take it personally. This has been the story of my life. My life is just a triangle between three women, and that is my mother, my daughter, and my partner.
I wanted to interview Donna Gilbertson, another ex-girlfriend, in a bedroom to reflect her intimate relationship with Johnny. And we ended up shooting her interview in the Red Boudoir at our producer's guest house. And she was very articulate and pretty forthright.
Meeting John's family for someone who was 17 in the 70s was like walking onto the set of Pleasantville. It was like this totally conservative family compared to my upbringing, which was theatrical, artistic, totally opposite to everything that he'd known. So for me, walking into this world, it was a bit of a shock. And they were lovely people, but very conservative. The influence of John's mother on all of us was so powerful, to the point where right through our relationship, if John wanted to be moody, if he wanted to express his tantrums, he would go home. He would just disappear and go home, and where he could be moody and it was acceptable and it was put up with. Whereas at work or at home with me, that kind of behaviour was, well, what's wrong? You have to explain yourself. To his mother, it was never needed. He didn't have to explain himself.
One of the other interviews that unfortunately didn't make it into the final cut was with Ron Tilsed, a former Arsenal goalkeeper and longtime friend of Johnny Warren's, and his first signing at Canberra Football Club back in '77. He was a really good speaker and had several great stories, but we just couldn't find time for the Canberra era, which was a real shame.
My first question to Johnny was, well, come on, let's meet this team. You know, I just come from a background, the big Highbury. As you know, the Marble Towers, as you walk in there with the Sir Herbert Chapman thing in the foyer, and I said, well, come on, Johnny, where's the stadium, where's the players? And he took me down to Canberra and he said, well, you're the only player we've got. We're in the National League starting in '77, and your first game is going to be Marconi, who I'd heard had won everything, you know, in Australian history. We used to cringe sometimes when we had to find the players' wages, you know, players hadn't been paid. And so I remember one day we played foot tennis for 25 hours through the night to create a Guinness Book of Records, playing foot tennis, just to pay the players' wages. You know, somebody told me the other day, Harry earns $100,000 or whatever a week. I mean, it's not all about money, but it opens a lot of doors. And the legacy of Johnny Warren will be, you know, it's there for you to go out and get it. And now you can get it in Australia. You can achieve it in Australia with your club and with your country, and get out and do it. And it's there on your back doorstep now. And Johnny was instrumental in organising that with his vision.
We shot the stylised stings that bookend the clips of the Uruguay match at Telstra Stadium, and Kyle Patterson, who used to work with Johnny at SBS, is now the media manager at the stadium, so it made sense to shoot Kyle's interview there as well.
I told you so for Johnny Warren often was said with a grin. He wasn't big, I don't think, on trying to be the oracle of saying, I predicted this on this day. But it was those around him who were more likely to say, gee, yeah, you were talking about that 5 years ago and it's happened. It could be playing trends. It could be something that happened in the administration of the game. It could be a coaching development that he'd pushed, and it would come to fruition. And he'd have a wry grin and say, "Yeah, I told you so." And it was those around him who then gave him this status as the oracle, and with a crystal ball, a man of great predictions, which he didn't really put a lot of stead onto. I don't think he took a lot of joy of being able to say, "I told you so," because often that meant for him it was 5, 10, 15 years of pain. He was more likely to say, "This should have bloody happened 5 years ago," not I told you so 5 years ago. He was always impatient like that. One of the most impatient people I've ever known.
Les Murray, whilst always supportive, was aware of maintaining a distance from the film. I think he felt too close to Johnny and wanted the documentary to be a more objective depiction of his life. But he was a great interviewee, as you'd expect, and I think he really opened up to us.
The last question, or last comment I really want is is that song that you sang to him in tribute.
Oh, yeah.
Let's just talk about that briefly, how that came about, that you, because you are a bit of a musician, aren't you? Or you have been a musician in the past.
Well, I have been.
Or you are still?
I have been a musician. No, not at the moment. Back in my wilder days of long black hair and tight-fitting jeans, I was a rock and roll singer. I have 2 daughters, both of whom are very gifted musically. And one of them is a singer-songwriter who was holding a musical bash at her backyard, a barbecue, where musicians were, or former musicians like myself, were invited. And I was there when I got a phone call from Johnny's brother, Jeff, who said that things are looking bad and that I should go into the hospital. So I left the barbecue, went into the hospital, and I was at Johnny's bedside for 2.5 hours. And in that period, nothing changed. And then I left the hospital, went back to my daughter's barbecue, and then I got a phone call maybe 20 minutes later that Johnny had died. My phone started to go crazy from media, and I shut the phone down. I really didn't want to talk to anybody. And I wondered whether I should now go home and open up a bottle of scotch and mope and feel sorry for myself in solitude. But I decided against that. I decided to stay at the barbecue where all sorts of musicians were getting up to do a bit of a jam and just listen to the music. And then I felt like doing a song because of Johnny. I'm not sure what drove me to it, but I said to a guitarist friend of mine, David Cunningham, "David, let's get up and do a Dylan song." He had no idea why I wanted to do this song, because I didn't tell anybody at the party that what had just happened. And we did Bob Dylan's Knocking on Heaven's Door with Johnny in mind.
Is that still a song that, is that now a song that you associate with him, do you think?
Well, I do, because I associate it with him now because of that particular experience. You know, "Mama, take this badge off of me, I can't use it anymore." He's done his bit for the game, and the game is immensely better off. It now has a real future, thanks largely to him.